I've been asked by a couple of regular YouTubers and tabletop commanders how I make my little cottage houses. So what I was going to do was a tutorial on how I do that. Now bear in mind that in Battle Games Monthly there's a lovely woman in there called the Wargames Widow who's doing an extremely similar process herself. So if you subscribe to that magazine, then as I say, she's doing virtually identical to what I'm doing. But anyway, I will show you how to do this. So what I'm using is all you need is cardboard, so some nice thick cardboard, or you can use estate agent signs as well, those do just as well. But I find cardboard is first of all freely available, and also it is quite absorbent of the PVA that we're going to use. You'll also need lots of coffee stirrers, again easily picked up, and you will need PVA glue, and if I can find it, you'll need some filler. I just use cheap stuff that I can get at knockdown prices, because basically you're just using the filler powder. A correction, it's actually miniature war games with battle games where the Wargames Widow is situated. And you'll need water. Apart from that, that is it. Okay, so let's get on with it. So because these are for 20 to 25 millimeter figures, I've measured these to 12 centimeters from here to here and 8 centimeters from ground to rooftop. And for the ends, which are going to fit here, that's 8 centimeters wide, 8 centimeters measured from here to where the roof starts, which is this angle here, and the height from the ground to the apex is 13 centimeters in this case. Now someone was asking me last night if I used a template. Well, I don't really, unless I'm making buildings of exactly the same size. But since we're doing medieval type villages here, it's very rare that you'd find houses of exactly the same size. So what I might do is make some say 9 centimeters across here, and the distance from the top of the wall to the roof may go how many inches, how many centimeters? I think I've got 4 there. Let me just measure that. So anyway, what I'll do is I'll vary it so the wall could end here, or the apex could be up here, just so that the roofs are slanted slightly differently. Well, if it's 8 and 13, then that's actually 5, isn't it? So that's 5 centimeters from here to here. So maybe what you want is 4 or 3.5, just to vary the slope of the roof. So yeah, you can use a template and just draw around it, but I find it's a lot easier just using a ruler, cutting it out with your craft knife, using a steel ruler to keep the edge straight, and that's why I've got some nice clean edges there, because I used a craft knife and a nice steel rule. So there you go. So what you want are 2 of those, because you've got 2 ends, and 2 of those because you've got 2 sides. So that is step 1. Step 2 is to measure out your windows and doorways. So what I've done here is I cut the first one because these are going to be 2 houses of the same type. So I cut this one out first. So the doorways are 3 centimeters height 2 centimeters width. The windows are 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters square. And you want to make sure there's enough gap. I've got a centimeter gap here, enough gap from the top of the roof because you're going to have a sloping roof on here. So you need to have the windows still visible and enough space between the sides here as well. So that is the next phase, cutting out the doors and windows. So what we have now is we have one blank wall with no windows at all, and the front wall which will have windows. Sometimes, well, for variety, I'll often cut little windows out of the side walls as well, or even put in another little doorway perhaps. As long as you make them all slightly different, that's fine, but the option is there. Okay, so that is cutting out the doors and windows. The next step is to strengthen the building because this is flimsy card. So this is where your coffee stirrers come in, and this is where you start getting creative with the coffee stirrers. Now this particular one is going to become a inn. So I've got lots of windows because there'll be lots of rooms, and as you can see this is slightly larger because it's a larger building. It's going to be larger than the example I showed you earlier. Again, any size you like. And what I've started to do now is strengthen the sides with the coffee stirrers, put some across the middle there so it's starting to get a really firm, and put them around the doorways as well. What I then do is put wooden eaves or beams above the windows. So at the moment I've got 3 on there. What I will be doing is putting some along here as well. You could lower this one, but it's also acting just as well as it is a lower eave for these windows here. So I'll need to copy what I've done here onto these 3 windows, and how I do that is I measure the first window. This is where your scissors come in, and that one I've made slightly smaller, but what I'll do is get the first one to be the right size, so leaving a little gap either side of the window opening. Once I've got that size okay, then I'll use that as the template for cutting the next 2. So I'll just show you how I do that. So what I've done now is measured the first piece of wood for doing the windows. So I'm now going to use that as my template to do another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, another 7. In fact, I think I'll fill in the edges as well. So I need another 11 of these. So that's 12 altogether for this particular building. So now I've got 12 pieces of wood to apply. Now, thinking about it, it's because we've just PVA'd these 3 across the top, it's probably a good idea to put all of these pieces of wood round the windows at the same time, because that way you've got a little bit of give if they're not quite cut to size, because, you know, this is pretty basic woodwork we're doing here. So what I'm going to do is pause and then put the glue on so you can see me sticking them in. So I've started to put these in. Another tip you might want to bear in mind is that if one of these pieces of wood doesn't quite fit in there, just try it in another one of the windows rather than trimming off a 0.5 millimeter of space, of wood rather. So I'm just checking that these will go. And the last one, which is a bit of a snug fit. Okay, and then I just smooth out. Doesn't matter really if you make a right mess with this PVA, because it all adds to the stickiness of the building to what we're going to do for the next process, which is to add the render phase. So I'll wait for that one to dry. Just straighten up the windows a little bit. So there you are, that's now ready for the render. Okay. Now, this is one I made earlier. It's half rendered at the moment, just to give you the idea of other things that you can add. Across the bottom here I've added extra coffee stirrers to break up the bottom, and that is going to, when this is painted black or brown, it's going to make a really nice effect having all this extra woodwork in there. Another thing you could do is put a diagonal across here, and maybe a diagonal across here as well. That would look quite nice. To do that, in fact, I will put a diagonal in there. Now that should be okay. Let me just get a longer piece. Okay, so what you do is you measure there, and we want to go here, and we want to go here, so we've got a nice square fit here. So let me just show you that. So we have a square corner here, and we need to cut here, so I shall just pause while I do that. Okay, so that's now cut and fitted. You'll see I've got little gaps in here because it's not an exact art, but that makes no difference whatsoever to what we're going to do. We could fill that little area in with filler and just paint over it anyway. No one is going to notice from a distance. If you're doing two buildings of exactly the same dimensions, you could use this as a template for doing exactly the same on the other one as well. So I'm now going to glue that down. Now this is a simple process. All you're going to need is something to mix your render in this case just a spare plastic container, and what I do is I put in the PVA first. Don't feel shy about putting in a lot of this, because this is going to actually help it stick. So for doing these buildings I will use that amount. What we want to make is a nice runny paste, not too thick but not too thin either. For these particular sections it's going to be nice to just be able to run that in and let it find its own level by sitting flat. This is why I now do these in flat pack form or prefab form, because previously I used to build the whole building as a completed four-walled structure and then scrape the filler on, and that worked okay, but it didn't give a very good effect. It was very, very rough and ready plastering so this is a better solution. So we've done the PVA, we now add the water. And mix that together. It doesn't have to be too mixed because it's going to get mixed again in a moment with the filler. Also, don't worry about splashing the buildings because this is going to go on top of it anyway. It does the buildings no harm whatsoever to get a bit of water splashed on them. The thing is as well, with the amount of wood that's bracing this structure, it is not going to bend. See, that's perfectly straight. There's no bendage at all because I've got so much woodwork on here, and also the filler as it dries will pull it together and make it a very solid structure because it's liquid stone. I've added some filler to the mix. Now what you want to do is put in some filler, but not too much, just to start getting it the right consistency, because you don't want it too thick. First of all, if you do get it too thick, then just add some more water just to thin it out a bit. Now this is very thin, so I'm going to add a bit more. If you are making these and if you use the same material for basing figures, then I tend to have some figures to hand that need basing, so that any of this that is spare can just go on a base rather than waste it. Now this is starting to look about the right consistency. When I'm putting the bases on the figures though, I tend to do a bit thicker mix. So if I do have some left, I might put a little bit more filler in there just to thicken it up a bit and then use it on these bases. Now that is just about okay. I think we just need a little bit more. Now at this point you're going to need either a cocktail stick or another thing that I do is I just get a piece of stirrer and cut a point on it so it does exactly the same job, because what we're going to be doing is poking the filler into the corners, so you need something with a pointed end for that. So either of those are fine. And if this is of the right consistency anyway, it'll find its way into those nooks and crannies automatically. So just get that in the middle so you can see. It doesn't matter if you get some of this on the woodwork because you're going to paint over it anyway. And it also doesn't matter if there are some lumps of filler in here, because it just adds to the effect of rough and ready plastering. These areas are so nice with the boxed in areas that I'm not having to do much poking into the corners anyway. If I just leave that bit there. So if you do need to use one, you just move some filler into the gaps there. And this is just of the right consistency that it is starting to find its level. If you are going to do these for 28mm, I would suggest you just add an extra centimetre to the width and height, and possibly on the doors as well, maybe add another ½ centimetre. But as they cost so little to make, it doesn't matter if it doesn't look right the first time. You'll learn from it and change the dimensions for the next one. So there you go, that's that one. And now you just leave that to dry, and I'll just do the other one. So again, just dropping some filler solution in, guiding it to the edges to fill in the little box. Oops. And there you have two sides of a building waiting to dry. So I'll just put them under my very hot halogen lamp, and they should be dry in a couple of hours. We're often interrupted while we're doing this, and the problem is with filler is that it dries, because that's the point. So to get round that, what I do is I just put on a thin layer of water on top. The water will just sit on top, and it means that the filler solution will not dry out, and then when you're ready to get back to carry on, you just mix it up, maybe putting a little bit more filler in just to get it back to the consistency that you had, and it's fine. So there's another tip for you. After an hour under my hot halogen lamp, these have nicely dried, and you'll see if you look up close that there's lots of little holes in there, but I don't mind that. It looks pretty authentic to me. So the next phase is to get a flat brush and paint the woodwork. And so far I've done these in black, but I do intend to do some in brown. So I shall just do this one and complete it and show you what it looks like. There's some filler on here, but you can just paint over that and try and get it as close to the edges of the woodwork as possible. If you're overrun, don't worry, because they were pretty slapdash anyway, the painters in these periods, so don't worry too much about that. So I shall just get on with that. I've now done 3 sides of this house, and the black paint is just starting to dry, and you can start to see it's taking shape. What I must point out is I always paint the inside of the windows as well, so the underneath, because everybody's going to be looking down. They're not going to be looking up to see the bits that haven't been painted. At the tops of the windows, you can paint them as well if you like. I tend not to, but I always paint these edges, if you can see that. So just dab the paint in there, particularly along the edges of the wood, So there's another tip. Another thing is that cardboard being cardboard, it's not always flat. So this one is a bit warped. So adding the wood coffee stirrers is going to be a way to straighten that out. But you can see that's not quite level. So this is where you use your bulldog clips. You can either use the small ones and put them at each end. That will do the job. Or you can put them at each end, the small ones, and then put one of these in the middle. Or if you really want to be clever at this scale, use one of these long ones. And these are very good for this job, but the other ones will do the job just as well. I'm going to use this one because I've got it. And because I've got it, I may as well use it. So I'm going to use that. And there you are. So that is now squeezing that nicely together. Once that is dried, I will be adding the stirrers across the bottom and up the sides to give it the extra strength, and I'll go around the windows, around the door, and perhaps put one across there for extra strength. Okay. Step back there about cutting the doors and windows. Get a decent scalpel. What I do is I like to have my houses, cottages, with the windows at a level that someone can actually fire out of, because I'm going to leave them all open. So this is 1 centimetre up. Hang on a minute, no, it's 1.5. Actually says here 1.5 by 3.5, so 1.5 to 3.5. Draw a line across, draw your little window. So this is 1.5 centimetres from the ground, just the right height for figures of my scale to poke the muskets through. And the doorway is 3 centimetres in height and 2 centimetres in width. And all you do is you poke through the corners and just basically saw your way up. To the top. All the way around. I always mark out, or started doing this recently, is scribbling through the area that has got to come out, so I know I'm going to cut out the right area, because I draw so many lines up and down and across that I need to know which area I'm going to do. Your way through. And there you have it. And the same for the door. It doesn't have to be a perfect line, because we're going to be putting wood stirrers around anyway, so you can, if you make a mess of it, it doesn't matter, because the coffee stirrers are usually straight-ish, so that will be fine to cover up any problems that you've had cutting it out. There you go. So if we just measure that for scale, he can peek his way out through there. He's going to be up to about here on his base, so he is going to be able to see his way through there. let's prove it with a proper skirmisher. There you go. Okay, so the 4 sides have now been painted and dried. I've added a window there made out of matchsticks and painted black for the ground floor in window. The last thing to do with these is to cut out some recesses here, because this is where the sides are going to fit. So you've got some purchase on here along the cardboard and also along here, because that's where we're going to do the gluing. Now what you need now is a base to put this on. So I make a base and I round the edges, because I find that makes it less likely to warp as well, and it also gives a nice finish to it, because we're going to cover this once the building is on and dried with filler. So that is your next step. So I shall just put the parts together and then stick it down. Now what I also find useful is to use these glass beaded pins to hold in the sides. So those are clamping the sides together. Notice down the side as well that there are some edges that we need to paint, so once the PVA has dried you can then touch up the sides as well, so it's all nice and black down the sides. Okay. Now what I've found useful is to turn the building over when you're building the sides up, fitting together, and I've drawn a line across the top here, and I've left a gap of just over ½ centimetre here. So what I do is do this on the sides, not the long sides, but on the short sides with the peak, and cut that out, both sides. So you've got something for the long sides to actually slot into. I'll just take that out. And just clean it up a little bit. So what we've got here is the wooden stick and some filler holding it together, and this is just the back of the cardboard, so that makes a nice area to sit your long sides in. If you do this on the long sides, then the building doesn't fit together properly, so make sure you do it on the short sides, otherwise your roof won't fit properly. So there you have it. You should have something like this with the 2 gaps for your building to slot into, and fill this section with an awful lot of PVA glue so that it plugs some of the gap. And that's all there is to that. For the roofs, I just cut out a cardboard roof, and I found this on the Wordsworth model railway site, red roof tiles, and that is a free download of some roof tile print, and you just cut these to size. Use the tiles in the middle for the apex, for the top of the roof, and just fit them together that way. so that you end up with something like this across the roof ridge, and there's your roof. And to make this, because this is quite thin carded, I put this on just from a pizza box. I put some coffee stirrers to strengthen it, to straighten it out, and also along the bottom there to keep the bottom edge straight, and that should fit on top of your completed building. Like that. And there you have it. What I've now done is put some filler along the base, and that you can just paint and then flock and add your foliage, maybe some rocks. And there you have it. Nice and simple, very inexpensive and very easy to do.